Hello and welcome to citiesabc.com series of interviews and profiles with global top thought leaders, experts and people shaping and creating new narratives for our world, society and business industry. My name is Anish Mohammed and I'm here to talk about the biggest problems humanity is facing, questioning and challenging how we can think bigger and out of the box. And as well profiling the people that are making the world a better place and as well creating new solutions, both in technology, policy making, and a lot of different areas. citiesabc.com is a new wiki for AR, intelligent smart cities tech digital platform for reinventing and uniting cities, universities, and all of us as citizens. And my work has been in these areas for a long time. And today I have with us Anish Mohammed, that is a person I know for a long time and I deeply respect for a very sharp mind and as well a sense of innovation, technology, but as well questioning the status quo, especially of the relationships of technology, ethics, and a lot of different areas. So Anish Mohammed is the co-founder of EthicsNet, that is reflecting about the ethics of AI. He's as well the co-founder of Polygon Protocol. He's an advisor, board member for the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, and he's one of the leading blockchain researchers and technologists that has been working both on the policies, but as well on the technology and the code that is what is going to shift our new developments as humans and societies. Welcome to our interviews, Anish. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you to invite me.
My pleasure. So, Anish, well, there's a lot of questions and I will try to align the interview based in all your multi-skills, especially as an academic, as a researcher, but as well a technologist. So I didn't mention actually the part as an academic, but you've been working on that for a long time, but we're going to touch that. So I would like to start by your, and I always do this, but I want to, in your case, it's particularly interesting being a citizen of the world. So can you tell us about your background in terms of education from childhood until your studies? I always like to start from the childhood. So where you started and where you come in terms of education.
Yeah. So I was born in a place in India called Kerala. It's a state in Kerala, and the district I was born in is called Alappuzha. And people who have a tourist kind of thinking would recognize the place in Kerala that is well known for backwaters. So it's a very beautiful place. So I was born there. I went to my school there, and then I went to a med school in Kerala. And then when I finished, I left, Kerala. And then for a brief time, I was in an institute in Bangalore called Indian Institute of Sciences. So I was doing some research on some hidden marker models to how to model intrusion detection. And then it so happens that I got hooked into this idea of micropayment systems. And Ericsson actually had a project to build micropayment systems. So, I joined Ericsson. Ericsson wanted me in Stockholm. So I moved from UK to Stockholm. And the next set of iteration was recognize that, having micropayment systems that actually are kind of bound to phones have some challenges, which we've already very, very familiar with. We've all recognized what happens when we have wallets with private keys. So we had a similar situation. We had a browser, and the browser had a private key. So for any reason, if somebody doesn't have the ability to access the private key, we have a big challenge, right? So this was an ongoing problem, and I kind of recognized it, and I said, I brought it up with the rest of the team, and so it was a difference in opinion. So I decided, when it hits the fan, I don't want to be around. So somebody turned up, asked me if I'd be interested in working on bioinformatics. So we had a startup that was that was in the plan to acquire via Linux, which was one of the biggest Linux BOL manufacturers at that point in time, and they wanted somebody to look after their bioinformatics part of it. So I joined, brought together a team to work on various bioinformatics problems, and then worked on it for a while and looking at computational drug discovery and a few other things. mean, our contribution is at some point in time in 2004, the team that I was part of actually delivered the number 4 in top 100. But I wasn't there when that happened. I had to leave. Like, design happens up front, delivery happens later. So part of the people that were involved in design up front. And then I decided I should get some proper, how could I say, proper qualification in the topics that I was interested in, which is cryptography. So I went to Royal Holloway and, I did a master's and then signed up for a PhD program. And then in the meanwhile, I, worked on various things. And then after Royal Holloway, I did a brief stint at Capgemini and then Accenture. And then I had 2 brief stints at Lloyd's and HSBC. And in like 2017, I kind of decided I had enough of the corporate world and the world that actually moved on. And my skills in the blockchain world was of high enough demand and I could actually contribute to the global economy on my own and didn't require much of a framework. So I decided I should do some consulting on my own. And in the meanwhile, I actually went to a Singularity University in 2013 and then to Stanford program in 2015. So that's pretty much my summary educational.
No, it's a massive background on the scientific and as well with the organizations you've been working. So I would like to touch the Singularity University and Stanford. So because you've been involved with that. So can you just highlight what you've been doing with Singularity University for your audience, for our audience, and as well, it touched a lot of your work in collaborative technology and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it just happens that Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis are the 2 people who have a lot of influence on how technology has been evolving. Ray was the director of AI at Google, and he is one of the few authors, who actually brought out the challenges that AI would create for humanity. And he's an optimist, so he actually has a bet between, there's a bet in 2030 between Ray Kurzweil and Mitch Kappa, which says singularity would happen at 2030. So Ray is for and Mitch is against. So, that gave, people like me and Nell an opportunity to work on ethics of AI. Peter, again, he's the one behind, a whole bunch of things. So all this challenges that he had actually started, which actually gave everybody the opportunity and the ability to actually create a real competition while you have very little of your own resources and deployment, right? So this was one of the key innovations from Peter that one could copy. So in Singularity University, I got the chance to actually, collaborate with a whole bunch of very interesting classmates of mine. So, the classmates of mine include some of the, one of the well-known science fiction authors, Hanu, my, collaborator and co-founder for EthicsNet. There are a whole bunch of other people that are there that allowed me to actually collaborate various places in various projects. And on the other side, it also allowed me, gave me exposure to a whole bunch of ecosystem in the Bay Area. So, it gave me a chance to meet, how could I say, the awesome people. So I've met Steve Gebertson, Mark Anderson. So it was a very, collaboration opening opportunity. Effectively allowed me go meet people, ask questions. I met Peter Shore, one of the big well-known figures in AI. You could actually go ask them in person, like the questions you had. I met Jeremy Howard, who was one of the co-founders of Kaggle. So my interest in data science was kind of, how could I, stoked up by him and helped by him in a loose sense of speaking. So, it gave me this opportunity of actually being able to, work with others. So for other example, I would say Vivek Watwa. He was faculty in SU, and I started working with him, and through him with his son, and he has been my co-author for a whole bunch of articles that I published in various places, including Forbes, CNN, and other places. So yeah, it has opened up a whole bunch of opportunities, and I've been working with lots of people.
Yeah, some of the top people in the world, and as well, have been shaping the present that we have now. So one of the questions now, going from your background to the present, and it's still before you go to the present. So you've been as well in the inception of a lot of things in terms of blockchain protocols and a lot of things in
Yep.
terms of AI. Could you just
Yep.
tell us a bit about your background in that area, and as well the research you've been doing, because it's a lot of things you've been doing in that area.
Yeah. So in this blockchain space, literally, I've been on the cryptography mailing list for probably around like 2000. So I have a friend of mine. He actually runs a mailing list called Silk, and Perry is the person who actually runs the cryptography mailing list is on that list. And so he just suggested to me that I should get on it, and I was on the list. So when the Bitcoin white paper came along, I saw it, and given I had actually worked in micropayment systems, and I've actually understood this challenge of so-called binding private keys to devices, I was kind of skeptical. So, being a skeptic always helps to actually not make money. So, in that instance, so I read the paper, but there was a bit of attraction. So in 2011, 2012, a bunch of us actually got together. We actually had like in a hackerspace in London, which is one of the things I've been involved in for a very long while. We actually ran a workshop, and some of the well-known figures were there, and I was contributing my expertise in cryptography to explain to people how to do the various things. And then when I went to SU, what happened is like I had an interaction with one of the investors, Ripple, and they were they were looking for their hire for the CTO. And by the time I got there, they all already hired Stefan. So Stefan was very interested in having me as one of the early advisors, and I ended up being an early advisor to Ripple, and I worked with him ever since till he left Ripple. And then, even though I was working for Ripple, I never had this attitude of like a single religion. It's like I'm more for really valuing the ability of a human to make their own choices. So I knew Victor Tron. So when Ethereum came about, he asked me if I'd be willing to help him. So when Orange Paper, which is the Ethereum Orange Paper, came out, I was one of the reviewers. So I ended up being a reviewer of Ethereum Orange Paper, and I've ever since worked not too much, but I've met with the the Ethereum Swarm team. So that was that bit. And then by 2016, 2017, the tokenization came to the fray, and I got swept in. And that's along the same time then when I met you. So I had already been a co-founder for 2030, and then I stepped back and I decided I should be, getting onto a project and being involved full time when politics becomes a mainstay of a project becomes very difficult for me. I would not qualify myself as being a politician, being able to navigate the murky waters of politics. So I am pretty happy to actually deal with medicine, mathematics, AI, blockchain, cryptography, you name it, I can handle most of it. But the politics is very, very hard. So I started stepping back, and then I ended up actually, working on. In total, right now, protocol-wise, it will be the 7th layer 1 protocol that I've been involved in some shape or form, either in design or design verification or help in that sense. And in that protocol sense, I've actually designed at least a dozen protocols in that sense. So when I say design, it's in like I do help the teams that actually want to design and with their design, and the design obviously belongs to them, but me as being the free agent who actually helps people with their designs, I've been involved in doing that. And then in the meanwhile, I was interested in having one of my own startups in the zero knowledge space, which I had for a while. And because of the various challenges that happened and probably being ahead of the game, I had to, give up and then just focus on doing research. So I mostly do a reasonable amount of research on cryptoeconomics, token engineering, and applications of the knowledge proofs and other things on blockchain. So that's where I kind of focus.
So on the blockchain side, I think it's particularly important. So there's been a lot of stuff happening on blockchain technology, and especially in the last 2 years, it became mainstream. So as one of the people that have been building kind of the plumbing and as well the foundations of blockchain technology. How do you
Yeah.
see what is the stage we have now? And probably not talking so much on the crypto, but more on the blockchain technology. On the crypto, I'll leave that probably for
Yeah,
more
absolutely.
traders.
Yeah, so in a blockchain sense, so if you think about it in this innovation curve that you normally have, there's this creation, and then there's this peak of hype, and there's this trough of disillusionment, and then this going up kind of phase. I think if you think in that sense, in a technology adoption sense, it's actually going up. Even though there is a recession that's is been hitting us, I suspect the outcome of a whole bunch of projects would be a key set of challenges in the blockchain space could be solved to a large degree. So when I say this, I mean to say if you look at Ethereum 2.0, they are going to solve some of the problems in scaling, some of the problems in consensus. And similarly, there are a whole bunch of protocols that are at the cusp of being released in one way or the other. So Polkadot is there. There's going to be a Dfinity instance. The Algorand, I expect them to actually have some significant, releases soon. Stockware guys have been quite active. Zcash guys have been active. So there's been a lot of progress. So if you look at just to give you an example, in the zero-knowledge space in the last 1 year, the total amount of papers that came out, you could pretty much think like every month you had a new interesting paper. There's so much of progress that has actually happened. So the side effect of all of this progress is the fact that a lot of the things that were considered pretty hard has become a lot more easy and more accessible to people that are not sophisticated. But at the same time, I should warn, it's also a risk. So the risk, I would say, is like if you look at the D4 situation where we had a protocol and the protocol was actually compromised, you actually have a real challenge where people are not recognizing protocols, how they're being built. And when you build things up, it's like a house being built, right? If you have a multi-story house or a building, you drive piles down, and the solidity of the piles actually allow the foundation to be held in place. And even though the person who builds the frame upstairs, up above the ground, doesn't really know what's the pillars that's been driven down, or never have even seen it, it is very possible they never saw it. It's a strength that actually they trust, right? And they should know the characteristics of it. And somehow this is being completely missed in the case of blockchain. So somehow people don't seem to think that there are pillars that's been driven down, and the characteristics of those pillars should be well understood if you were to, and the foundation should be well understood when you build a house on top of it. So if you are building a DeFi protocol, you need to understand that you are sending data and instructions at the same construct across from one machine to the other, and you don't actually have memory space isolations in that sense. And this is like an interesting challenge, and none of the security challenges are really well understood. And there is also some amount of illusion that are crept in, which says simulations are as good as everything else. And given COVID, I am pretty sure that anybody who has any ability to read something and make sense can understand that simulations in no way is a real representation of what's going to happen. Simulations could be helpful. So if we were to take the case of UK, we have this situation where the UK government actually wanted some outcome. So they actually talked to a bunch of modelists to model herd immunity, right? And this is like very optimistic. You can use whatever phrase you want. It's very optimistic. You decide what your initialization parameters, and you run it in a particular way that it gives you the result you want. So simulations have a massive challenge. Simulations don't always have to align with reality, and this is like a thing that everybody in the world should have opened their eyes by now, because like COVID completely shattered everybody who has been doing simulations. So like you can actually go into even Harvard. Harvard had a whole bunch of papers that came out. CDC, they had a whole bunch of people who had done simulations. You can actually see the variations that are there. So a simulation essentially means like you have a whole variation of things. And when you want to really be sure something is going to stand the test of something, you need to have far more rigor than just simulation. So there you are. That's my 2-minute worth of ramble.
No, no, it's a very important rumble. So, and one of the things I want to just go from the foundations to the practicalities. You've been involved in a couple of projects on the blockchain area,
Yeah.
and as well some of them you've been building infrastructure protocols. So, how would you look at the stage where we are right now? Do you think the technology, because we have two very strong and different uh, kind of verticals going around in the blockchain industry. So one is the centralized model that
Yeah.
that is becoming mainstream, and that happened with the
Yeah.
beginning of the internet. If you look at the inception of the
Yeah.
internet, we had open source,
Yeah.
and suddenly it became closed source by a couple
Yeah.
of big groups. Do you see
Yeah.
that the blockchain technology might go in the same direction, or we might still make a balance between the two levels?
Yeah, so I want to give a better narrative to the whole situation that has actually developed, so people understand this fully. So when everybody thinks that all the closed source entities actually are closed source, that's not actually true. Let's take the case of cloud, right? The whole base of the cloud is pretty much open source. So Linux, okay, most of the instances run Linux. It's open source. Look at Hadoop, whole ecosystem. Pretty much all of it is open source. Look at Spark ecosystem. Pretty much all of it is open source. And the people who actually make money, this is what I call the open source protocol arbitrage, right? So the way I would describe this is as like, there is this thesis of there's this fat protocol thesis that exists, that's Union Square Ventures said about blockchain. I would say there's a fat open source, or I would say the reverse, the lean open source thesis, right? So what effectively open source allows you to do is that the protocol layer actually takes very little value, and all the value accrued is actually in the application layer. And in the application layer, the people, they do customizations and make domains and fiefdoms and curtail it, okay? So if you look at Google, if you look at Facebook, if you look at Twitter, the underlying technology, pretty much all of it is open source, right? And it is a traditional thing that has been happening in a lot of industries. So what it means is like we have a tragedy of commons of a very different kind. So the real funding and real effort that goes into the fundamentals of most of the technology, whether it be pharmacology, whether it's science or electronics, whether it's open source software or software in that sense, it's mostly open source, right? So you were starting off by saying what happened with internet. Internet actually DARPA's money to actually connect all the things up. They open sourced it, right? So there's technology that actually happens. So there is open source technology, but you actually, put, how could I say, boundaries around it to actually segregate your ecosystem from actually interacting with others. In the blockchain space, what I'm seeing and what I'm hoping will happen is that there's two different models. One is called the cathedral model, which is like more centralized, and the open source model, which is called the bazaar model. So right now, most of the value is really accrued in cathedrals. The cathedrals are places where they have lots of people and lots of value. So you can think of banks as being cathedrals. But the thing we need to recognize is these cathedrals need to talk to each other. And cathedrals don't actually have like tunnels between them. They actually have to go through the bazaars, right? So the possibility is that when this value transfers across the bazaars, right, the routes through the bazaars, it is very likely that some of the value get distributed, and the value in the bazaar might increase. And if the value in the bazaars increase, and the bazaar ecosystem is large enough to actually have their own vibrant economy, then it is very possible that the so-called foods might disappear. So look at history. History shows this. Like at one point in time, one of the most successful models were foods, right? Now we don't see that many foods. Why? Because this collaboration is the key for successful economy. And this is effectively going to happen in a financial space as well, or a financial domain as well. So what we actually have is right now we have a whole bunch of castles that have a very large amount of value, who talk to each other. They have to go through the bazaar. This is the thing that everybody seems to miss. And this has been the state in history. We always had so-called states like this, which had a strong boundary, boundary conditions. They actually got all the things and accrued the wealth, and they controlled it. And then what had happened is innovations happened, and innovation allowed same level of security for people who are living outside the castle walls, right? And the cycles of innovation that happens in history is going to happen again. So the people who are living behind the castle walls, who think they have false security, are going to soon recognize, when guns and gunpowder came around and cannons came around, castles and castle walls became a big disadvantage, right? And walls couldn't really hold off the enemies, right? And this was made worse by aircrafts. They could just fly over, right? So literally, that became a big, big disadvantage. So this is going to actually happen when protocols develop, blockchain protocols go beyond the point where they're able to actually provide very efficient mechanisms of both governance and transference of value. The castles and also provide a level of security that's appropriate to what castle provides. So nobody will be willing to live inside a castle, with a lot of restrictions. So think of it as a social isolation, right? So we are all inside, as a British saying goes, a man's castle in that sense. It's like we are inside our castles. Most of us are inside our castles. I don't think anybody really likes it, right? We would really like to be outside. So this is the same thing that's going to happen with value as well. So my expectation is this innovation would actually allow the value to get outside the walls of the castle, and that will result in more vibrant economy. And more, what you're seeing and what we were discussing previously before we started this conversation is the requirement of globally unified thinking and globally unified governance. And there is no better technology that's currently available that's able to deliver this to humanity than blockchain. So given all these things, whether it's finance or this is like the value system or this lessons in history where castles have failed, and all those things indicate to us, it's like if you look at history, everything happens in cycles. So people build castles and it gets destroyed, and next set of innovations happen. They again and go build castles, right? This is the castle. The banks are the castles of the world right now. So this is my view. My view is like as things progress, when the roads are getting broader, because right now one of the challenges we had with the blockchain protocols, which you rightly pointed out, is the throughput. So you didn't have enough of a wide road, so you could actually connect the castles, and it wasn't efficient, right? So now once this roads networks become really, really efficient and cheap and safe, right? This is the condition that need to be there. When this becomes cheap, efficient, and safe, then everybody would recognize, look, there's not much of a value in being inside a castle.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I like the metaphor and the way you put it. So I think on that level, I'm picking on that infrastructure of technology that you're talking. So from blockchain, if you look at foundation technologies, we look at blockchain, we look at AI, and you look at IoT and a lot of different things on smart cities, infrastructure, and so forth.
Yeah.
So in particular, how do you see the evolution of blockchain? Because let's say, if we put it in a simple way, blockchain is like, how can I put it in a simple way? Blockchain is like a plumbing system for the data that can actually create identity and as well, all the interoperability, but as well the security. You are an expert in encryption. How do you see that relationship? Yeah.
I have to admit, I wrote a piece like a good few years ago on smart cities. I think it got covered in one of those, I don't know what VentureBeat, I believe. So it got picked up and kind of described. So I've been very, very interested in this paradigm that you are referring to. I mean, mostly, I wouldn't say blockchain is a place which is ideal for storing data, meaning in a sense like storing on a blockchain is very inefficient. So if you were to take the case of Ethereum, if you were to store like a 1 gigabyte of data, I think like 2 or 3 ETH is what you require to actually store it, right? Which is very expensive in that sense. So, but if you want to anchor it in a sense, like you provide provenance of that onto a blockchain, that's like super useful. And I think the bigger value here is not just having this ability to store or provide provenance. It's even better is the fact that you can actually attach a policy to data set. So essentially, when I allow somebody to use my data, I can actually give my data along with the smart contract that says, this data is kind of bound to this smart contract. The smart contracts make sure that some policies are being enforced. So this is what the real game changer in the situation is. There are more and more, sophisticated techniques and tool sets that's being available to us from the world of homomorphic encryption, the world of zero-knowledge protocols, the world of multi-party compute. So multi-party compute and zero-knowledge proofs kind of merge at one point. But irrespective of that, the broader class of these technologies are allowing us to do a lot more than what we could actually do. And blockchain, as I said, the key thing for blockchain is this ability to provide governance frameworks, right? And then we could actually hand this over. So for example, most cities actually have the challenge of traffic, okay? As in like traffic queues. So imagine a world that every vehicle actually had the ability to bid for the chance of going through. So what could then happen? What then happen is like the price discovery for crossing a traffic light happens, right? So you know who values the most for crossing the traffic light the fastest. Then you can actually price this, and the people who want to go the first, they will actually, there might be some exceptions where an ambulance needs to go through, and we will bypass that, or a police car needs to go through, then we will bypass that. But for the rest of it, we can actually have a marketplace where, and the marketplace is actually being bid by the car, your autonomous vehicle you are in, and the autonomous vehicle actually does the bidding on behalf of you, right? So this could be the kind of the future you can have, where governance is actually being, handed over to a whole bunch of data that's in various places, market making mechanisms that can actually use blockchain and smart contracts to actually make sure that the rules are being upheld. And then we can actually have, we can apply different governance mechanism. We can apply coordinated voting. And as a result of all of that, you can have very ethical frameworks, fair frameworks being applied with very little overhead. And that's what is normally required. Like what literally we were discussing previously is the challenge that democracies normally have elections 1 in 4 years. And it doesn't represent everything in the next 4 years, right? They get elected for a particular, particular line of reasoning. And at that point in time, we evaluate them and then we get on the vote. But, they change. Boris Johnson might have, right now, if an election happens, it is unlikely Boris Johnson will win again, given what he has actually done with COVID, right? So, but we have no ability in a democracy to remove Boris Johnson. Literally, what we should have had is this ability to make a decision on every decision or every viable decision, or every, you know what I mean. It's like it's the decisions that we could actually look at and provide an input to. This could be automated, so we could all have our preferences put into something, and there are other mechanisms. You could have almost a delegated proof of stake mechanism, right? So there are a lot of tools from consensus in the blockchain world that consensus being part of the blockchain world, being applied into cities and into democracies, and we can have a much better, much more flexible, much more efficient, and much more frictionless mechanism. So we could actually achieve the, literally the utopia that we all wanted to have in terms of democracy.
Yeah, that's. So I want to be provocative on that level. So we have a big problem right now, and I know that you like a good provocation on that level. So, and in a constructive way. So one of the challenges that we're facing right now is that all this innovation is definitely crashing with the geopolitics and the lack of education. And we're starting to have a very fragmented society where we have politicians not having a clue about technology, most of society using technology for fake news and even to create some kind of theories of conspiration, in some cases very paranoid. So that means all this technology might just take us to a big chaos. And as well, you are a teacher and as well a person very focused on policy making, ethics. How do you see this challenge that we have on these areas? Because this is, for me, a critical element here.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I would probably go one step further to say this. So, I actually had a paper published by a friend of mine and Jean-Luc Nancy on the philosophy of this, and they referred to one of the papers I wrote earlier. The challenges that we have is this is how I would describe it. Technology evolves really fast, and governance framework does a catch up. And now what happens next is like mostly, the governance frameworks in the society looks at the first order implications of evolution of technology, right? So what has literally happened right now in many ways, the set of people that are in power and you could probably say are critical to the catastrophic failure of containment of COVID are beneficiaries of a company called Cambridge Analytica. And there is enough of data that's available. I happen to know a couple of the people. I've worked with them in other projects. So I've, for example, let's not name names, but people have actually worked with me on projects other than the Cambridge Analytica, but who used to work with Cambridge Analytica, and because of them, I have a pretty good idea of how they operated. So the operation of Cambridge Analytica actually resulted in an advantage to different sets of actors, right? So if you were to look at, what has actually happened in 2016, there was a significant shift in the global policy settings. One was a change that actually allowed, by a narrow margin, Brexit, and similarly by a narrow margin, election of Trump. So catastrophic failure in meeting COVID right now, what has shown is two sets of actors that actually got beneficial effects by use of technology, by really focusing their messages on a small segment of the population. And that's by doing so, in spite of the fact they actually breached the privacy laws of the country, they were still allowed to progress. So this is one of the things I really, really don't understand. One of the real failures of the democracies of the world is the fact that when somebody reaches a law, which was in this instance the privacy laws, right? If you actually do this for something else, you'll be put to prison, right? So if you do just defraud, right, they'll be completely, taken out of the office and be thrown out, right? But the thing that's actually being missed is the fact that even though people said this before, the data is the new oil, and if you were to translate that in a real sense, wars are being fought over oil, and we have no doubt about those facts. The whole of second half of this century, last century, has been wars that have been fought over oil, right? So if you translate that to wars being fought over oil, and you have oil being replaced by data, and then you can actually see where those wars should be going next. And now privacy is like your real ownership on the data. That's what that translates to. Why have there been wars on oil? It's literally oil is under the earth. And if you have two countries and one country can actually drill in their place and get into the shelves and then pump it out, another country gets to the same shelf, and they have a challenge. They have to agree. And now this is a challenge, and they sometimes the agreement doesn't work, and they end up fighting. So Iran and Iraq, right? And invasion of various places by the US. All of that is like interesting. So now take that and shift the paradigm and look at it with the data glasses on. And what you're seeing is that's being completely misunderstood. The data, the oil that's that's actually owned by the citizens of the state is being plundered by a bunch of actors who could have bases in around the world, and they're taking over because they have the ability to break the rules. And this breaking of rules is not considered the same way, and nobody fights for it. And this, to me, is an anomaly. And this resulted in a certain set of actors coming to power, especially who have very right-wing views. And this resulted in a complete catastrophe where human lives are being lost. So, I don't know how to phrase it any better than this.
No, I think you made very good points, but I think the challenge is, and I think as a technologist, I want to ask you, and as well as a professor, so how can we rebalance that? Because of course there's education, but there's as well a paradigm shift because we have the most advanced technology in the history of mankind. We are touching right now in the artificial intelligence, and you start touching in singularity, which is something I want to touch. But at the same time, we have a huge part of the world population not understand. Although we have a paradox of living. If you look purely from the 7 billion people living in the world, we live better than ever in history. But at the same
Mm.
time, we have this schizophrenic kind of cyberpunk vision of the world, very dystopic, that is increasing. So do you think we can actually realign the utopia in a good way for technology and the trust in tech and all these areas that we need to have? Because at the moment, people don't trust tech. They use it. It became like we are almost like, in a lot of ways, cyber parts of our body, because the way we use phones is becoming kind of like a prosthesis of our bodies. But at the same time, we have all these challenges. So how do you see this part? Because I want to touch this, because there's not a lot of people reflecting this and especially coming up with solutions on this.
So, are you asking me, are we seeing a shift in paradigm in terms of how technology is being governed, or are you asking me, do I think that is necessary? There's two different things.
I think probably both.
Okay. Okay. Oh,
Because
that's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
I'm more interested right now. There's a problem, okay, and
Oh,
the problem
everybody
is
agrees.
yeah.
I think that part, the answer to that is a very big yes. If you were to ask anybody, you will get a yes for that answer. Now, what they differ and how they differ is how. Okay, how are we going to get to where we want to, right? The world has a big problem, which you rightly pointed out. So the world has probably between 7 and 8 billion people, and there's probably 1 billion of them kind of live in the so-called developed world, right? The so-called first world, and the second world, and the rest of it actually has the majority. And if you look at the resource allocation, resource allocation is very skewed. A very small minority of the world controls the largest amount of resources. Now, the question arises, can we actually have a democracy where this is this massive skew in resource allocation? So the resource allocation skewing has actually increased significantly over the last 25 years, right? And probably over the last 50 years, that's been the trend, but 25 years actually driven this through the roof. So technology has been allowing people to really increase this arbitrage. So the question we should be asking is there a way by which we could have a better allocation of resources, better allocation of equality of opportunities, whether it's in education, whether it's in jobs, whether it's in resources? I mean, that is probably something we need to understand, because if that is not there, what we will effectively end up having is this very, very unequal distribution of resources, and very few individuals around the world actually having the ability to influence decision making. And we literally are in the precipice of a situation where we might have a plutocracy rather than a true democracy. In many ways, you could probably look at the UK set of ministers, like current set of ministers, look at the number of, I would describe as millionaires from a particular club who have very, very significant positions. And the funny thing, and this is the thing that I would say, the irony, so Jacob Rees actually has a hedge fund. And in a typical situation, if you were in a consulting company and if you were to do this, they would kick you out. They say to you, okay, if you're going to have information from your client that you can actually use to make more money, or you are in a situation where you can actually make a decision and by doing so, your company would make money, you should not be there. And it is so funny that we have a whole bunch of people. This is not just here, right? And there is also this, senator in the U.S. who has actually had to resign from the, I think it's the Security Committee in the U.S. Senate, because he had a a security brief just before COVID, and he sold his shares, right? So this is a problem. Like, what we are having is a challenge where we have a bunch of people who have accumulated a lot of resources. They use these resources to take over control. This is what the thesis I was describing before, what has actually happened in 2016. So there are different entities. Cambridge Analytica was actually invested by somebody who had a hedge fund, right? And his family members are there on the board. But this is all public information. So they all had upside in certain movements. So if you run a hedge fund, if you could actually influence something going in a particular direction, you can hedge. You can go long or short. I mean, in this instance, the simplest description is like, if you knew you're going to have Brexit, and if you could improve your odds of actually having Brexit, and if you knew with a reasonable amount of certainty that you can have a devaluation of pound by like 30%, that's a good market opportunity. You are incentivized to actually make sure that event is supposed to happen, and you have nothing to lose in that sense. You are an external actor, right? And I'm not even talking about geopolitics in other nation states being interested in this outcome. I'm just describing economic incentives of people in the so-called open Western economy, a market economy, manipulating and possibly being involved in how things could be moved. So, you could be a conspiracy theorist and you could say, what, Cambridge Analytica is a good example of a bunch of actors who would have had an upside in actually having certain things happen in the world. That's one possible view. Another view is like it was something that was waiting to happen. It just happens that all these people stood up along the line and, they all collaborated. Who knows? I mean, if you are somebody who's interested in Bayesian mathematics and Bayesian statistics, you would look at the priors and you go, you know what? Cambridge Analytica has been involved in so many elections in so many places around the world, and the people who are all involved there are of a particular kind. And this thesis implies this is a very likely scenario, and hence you should draw your own conclusion. And this is the thing. Like people seem to actually not have memory of things that has gone in the past. And generally speaking, the past, in many ways, actually it gives you like better insights to what's coming. It doesn't mean that it's going to give you all the information that's required to predict the future, but it's a very informative thing that actually gives you good framework of what's going to come. So that's my take on the whole thing.
So on that level, and picking right now in terms of AI, and you're part of multiple international boards in terms of AI and ethics and things like that. So as we start having, so technology tends to be absolute because you need to look at data, and like you said, in terms of even in terms of mathematics, it's about the sum of parts and the sum of relationships. So when you start programming AI and you link all this data, because at the moment, so that's one thing is us as humans that have like systems based on evolutionary fragments and evolutionary probability, let's put it that way. But when you go to programming machines and as well programming our next evolution, definitely is going to be AI and machines and all these different areas. So how do you see, especially being part of a lot of ethical boards, how do you see AI not creating an absolute monster, let's put it that way, because if we program AI to become a monster, it will become a monster. And of course, and there's a lot of things in terms of OpenAI. You mentioned Singularity, and SingularityNet is very positive on that level. How do you see that, especially on the ethics of AI and as well in terms of AI in general?
So, I mean, just to be a bit more prescriptive, I mean, the challenges of AI are still open, right? The question of biases are still open. So, if you were to think about the current context of COVID, you can actually see what's happening. In the UK, if you are either Asian or Black, your risks are much higher. But at the same time, if you were to look at, a prediction algorithm and you were running a simulation, going back to simulation, right? The simulation has no way to actually recognize you at being, a Caucasian or a BAM, right? BAM, BAM, however you pronounce it, right? So the outcome here is like we need to have a couple of things in place to get a better sense of things. First is explainability. How can you actually explain to somebody that, whatever that's being done inside in this black box is kind of, or that's being fair. And the second part is the ability to verify, okay, did it actually do what it did, what it's supposed to do, right? And these are like the minimal things that we would probably need to go on a very long journey before we can get to a stage where we can actually have, AI frameworks that we could completely, fully trust. Because the more and more we trust, like the way I say is like, if you think about the two schools of, probably there are multiple schools of simulation. One of the schools of simulation is agent-based modeling, right? That's literally, AI working, in a slightly different way to actually provide whatever you want. But what I'm kind of saying is like, we have decision-making tools that are there that we rely heavily on. And right now that's what is happening. And we get to a point where there's a transitioning between decision-making tools that allow you to make decisions to tools that actually make decisions. So this transition is where we should be starting to worry. So if we have AI algorithms and we literally have the situation where we have algorithms deciding on who gets what and how, and we don't have the ability to A, verify, B, have explainability, and probably other characteristics, and check for biases, right? So this really becomes really a big challenge. So progress to a singularity, this could be like a significant challenge for us. And we could actually have all the problems that we currently having. The question about resource allocation we touched upon previously, and then we also talked about like this real challenges between our developed world and underdeveloped world, or the first world and the third world. So all of that become really, how could I say, well, it'll come out like really in a differentiable sense. So it wouldn't require a lot of analysis to see the difference that's in the first world and the third world, how different things are. And in a world where AI could take over, I would assume this the biases that's creeped in, because most of the things are being developed in the first world and they get developed, deployed in the third world. The norms of the first world will be deployed on the third world, and it could be a pretty interesting scenario. The norms that we assume to be true will be completely, things that cooked up by, if you are being a cynic, would say, white men in air-conditioned rooms, thinking about places where there's no water and it's like 40s or 50 degrees centigrade, and very few resources to use. So it's just a two different worlds. So we have a challenge. So we I don't think we are in any way, shape, or form to answer any of them, or we have clear answers to it. There are lots of initiatives that are happening. People are working on it, but I am not 100% sure we have answers.
Well, it's I think it's one of the things that makes me not sleep some nights. But I think one, coming back to right now more on the technology side and taking out. So one thing I would like to have from a technical perspective, and I think it's important to answer this to our audience that is increasing, but as well to anyone in the world that wants to know. So I would like to ask you from a technology's perspective, if you could define the bridges between especially blockchain technology and artificial intelligence. I think it's really important to put it in a good way. If you could come up with a couple of ways how you see the two things working together, both technology and operations wise.
Could you repeat the question?
So the question is if you could, I think now coming back purely from a technology perspective, if you could look at giving some of your thoughts in terms of the relationship between blockchain technology and artificial intelligence, especially in the areas of smart contracts and the relationship with machine learning, and how you see the two things evolving. Because of course, blockchain has a lot of different areas you can go.
Oh, absolutely. So if you were to think about a governance framework that actually allows AI to be governed in a fair and open manner, I think at this moment in time, there is no better technology than blockchain. I know this is a bold claim, but I can't see of anything else that's actually there that is able to provide the same levels of verification and other tools for people in AI to use. So just to give you an idea, so when I say blockchain, I assume you bring in the things that I described previously. We would actually have the tools from the secure multi-party compute available to us. We will have tools from the fully homomorphic encryption tool set available to us. We would also have the tools from zero knowledge protocols available to us. When these kind of tools are available through blockchain to AI, we should be able to provide a framework where the governance, so the challenges that are described, so providing explainability, providing proof that's actually doing what it's supposed to do, providing governance mechanisms for one algorithm to be replaced by another algorithm. All of this could actually be done in a manner that's transparent, but still having very high levels of security and to a degree allowing the kind of representation that we actually want. What I mean by that is whether we want to represent a true democracy or you want to implement some sort of quadratic voting, all of that is possible from a blockchain onto an AI ecosystem. So that you can actually have much better governance and explainability and other characteristics. And also there is this question about garbage in, garbage out, which is like if you have data coming in, and you already highlighted this, like how blockchain could actually give you provenance to data sets. So if you have a provenance to data set, AI could produce far more valuable outcomes. So it's valuable for AI in multiple ways. In providing that a particular algorithm is actually trying to do what it's supposed to do. You can explain how it does what it does. The data is getting it has the kind of provenance that it's supposed to have. And in instances where there need to be agents and they need to be incentivized for doing various things, you can use blockchain to actually use that as well.
So so coming back right now again to singularity, and
Sure.
I want to particularly because it touched singularity, but it touched ethics as well. So you touched a bit before in the AI and singularity, and as well some of the trends going on. So there's people saying that will be a date, but more than anything is going to be more an evolutionary part of mankind.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
If you look at AI as the next evolution of mankind, which it's already happening, how do you see that part of singularity and how do you define it? And as well, working with Singularity University, you have a lot of insights from different areas and different global experts. But as well, your vision on singularity and especially the stages of AI and the next 10 years, 20, how you see things evolving.
I mean, I would put my hand up and say, I don't know when singularity would happen. It is likely that singularity might happen and we will only, detect it in hindsight. That's a very likely possibility. But this is how mostly innovation normally happens. It's like the case of, antibiotic being discovered by Alexander Fleming, right? It's, you find things out by accident. So I suspect that is how probably, the singularity might happen and we only find it in hindsight. But how fast would it happen? Again, if you were to look at the set of all experts in this space, and they're being asked this question multiple times, and most of them would give a timeline of like 15 to 25 years, and this has been going on since like I think 1960s. So this is generally the thing about humans. Humans are pretty good at predicting things that are short term, but when it comes long term, it's pretty bad. We are pretty bad at predicting long-term events. So I would put my hand up and say, like, I am not, that well informed to actually say, this would happen at that point in time. As I described previously, there are some bets that people have put in. By 2030, we could have singularity. I don't have that level of confidence that Ray has on that event being happening. But it is very possible that 2050 it might happen, like in the next, 25, 30 years in time. It is very likely that would happen. And, what would be the impact of that on humanity? I honestly don't know. But, it will be a real paradigm shift. But, when it happens, and as I was describing, given that it would happen in an unequal distribution, And the interaction between singularity and humanity would be an interesting space to watch. And there are some situations where this could be not so effect. This should be not so good for the humanity. So generally, the way I would describe it is like when Columbus landed in America, there was this civilization that had guns and civilization that had diseases that turned up at a civilization that didn't have either. Okay, so these are diseases of the West in the sense like
That's a good point.
chickenpox,
Yeah.
and literally. So you could actually think of the same that's going to happen. So they come down and they look at, when this is being documented systematically. If you read Muqaddimah or The Clash of Civilizations by Samuel Huntington, you see the same thing happening. Every time there was a clash between a civilization that's superior to a civilization that has that less of technology, generally speaking, the civilization with less of technology will be wiped out. So you can look at Zulus. Even though Zulus were very brave warriors when the British actually invaded the place, how a Gatling gun is, in no way matched by a spear. So this is effectively what's going to happen. And literally, what we need to understand is like industrialization literally resulted in weaponization of industrial tools that allowed industrialized manslaughter. So who knows, AI could have a similar effect. It could actually result in, how could I say, a singularity that has ways to control humanity or take away humanity, or I don't know, like it will be a pretty interesting next 20-30 years. And hopefully if you're still around at the end of it, we can actually evaluate what really happened.
Yeah, that's for sure. No, that's fantastic. And coming back to that, we passed already 1 hour, so I will just go through
Wow.
two more questions. But it's
Okay.
a lot of things actually taking notes, and there's a lot of fantastic quotes and fantastic things here. So I want to touch two areas in terms of the things we're discussing right now. So we didn't touch much about what you're doing at the moment. I touched that in the beginning, but if you could tell us your main work, I think it's important for our audience to know more about you besides your fantastic ideas.
Yeah. So what has actually happened is like since COVID actually appeared, given I have a degree in medicine, I've worked on a bit on bioinformatics and translational bioinformatics, and I understand the thing that I described as agent-based modeling, because that was actually used in the past 3 or 4 years to do the thing what we call in the industry as token engineering. So I had all the tools in my disposal, and in addition to this, in some parts of the world where I went to med school, I had access to the people who were decision makers. So this resulted in me trying to get involved and help decision-making process. So it's essentially one of the things that took up a good chunk of time. And there were other people in other parts of the world who were running hackathons. So again, as somebody who understands technology, security, privacy, and the challenges of privacy when gathering data, and as somebody who has been very, very vocal about privacy preserving machine learning, all of this came to the fray. So literally what had actually happened is like all the things I've been interested in, in a weird sense are happening, come into the forefront, and I ended up actually splitting my time across a whole bunch of things. So I've tried helping various people working on privacy preserving contact tracing. I have some very critical views about what has been happening. Effectively, what I would say is when somebody says to you that contact tracing has been successful, you should probably ask them how many people in the world, in this part of the world where they actually have implemented contact tracing, actually have the application installed and actually have it working. And you'll be surprised to hear the answer, which is low double digits, right? And this is funny. And so you might then ask the question, who has the upside of actually gathering this data? And the cynical me says, these are the people who actually gain from having the low, I would say the low hanging fruits of economic gains of big data, who made a value by just taking people's data, which would be the Googles of the world, the Twitters of the world, the Amazons of the world, the Apples of the world, right? And much less of a value for the average citizen on the street. So that's one of the things that have been of interest, both from a policy level and from a technological level. The last 3-4 months, I've been involved in that. And from a protocol perspective, I'm still working with a couple of my friends. There's one of my friend Benjamin and another of my friend Bishwa. We've been working on a protocol called Polygon. It's just an ongoing, how could I say, conversation and thought process and bunch of code being written. And we are going through multiple iterations. And then I also do a small amount of teaching in a couple of universities. So I have this head of research position at SRH. So I teach a course there. Then I do have an adjunct faculty position at Harvard Space, so I teach a course there. And then, as a citizen who wants to add positivity to the world, I decided, you know what, I should teach. Given people are in lockdown and they have a bit more bandwidth, I should try teach people token engineering, because if blockchain and smart contracts and tokens are going to be the new norms for the new democracy. Understanding how that new democracy works is very important for everybody who's going to participate in it. So I am running a course online. So anybody who's interested who could contact me. It's completely free. A friend of mine has volunteered to do half the lectures. I probably have like a couple of guest lectures, just giving everybody an understanding of how how the token ecosystem works, and then taking them the journey, so at least they understand what is really happening, rather than being really blindsided by a bunch of experts, so-called experts, telling them a lot of nonsense.
No, that's fantastic. And we'll put the links in the interview and on the different channels where we're publishing the interview. So it's really fantastic, and especially your education and ideas are amazing. So probably the last question as we pass along the 1 hour benchmark. So, but I think it's a great it's a great thing. So, how do you see, especially with COVID-19? You touched COVID-19, but we didn't go that. Do you see COVID-19 is actually rethinking and actually melting down the global economy as we know it? Because we're talking about probably the biggest revolution in the last 100 years. Financial quantitative easing is becoming crazy. And of course, this will create a lot of new issues besides, of course, the health ones. How do you see that from both a technology, but as well as a social impact driven person and as well a technologist?
So that's a very, very interesting question. It definitely, I mean, most people have already said this already, which is like, the world we knew before is not going to be the world we see after. I mean, it is very likely that's going to be the case. So in general, the world actually had a supply chain that was distributed globally, and literally there was a delayed action. So if something happened in one part of the world, given the globalization, every other part of the world will get impacted. So what COVID has actually shown us is this real vulnerable underbelly of the global economic system. So not just the fact that you have services that being sold from Ukraine being consumed in the UK, or software services from India being consumed in US, but also the fact that we have a manufacturing pipeline that's actually mostly concentrated in China and that part of Asia, that actually drives the whole of the global economy. And a disruption in a supply chain that will really result in how the markets will move. So there is also the challenge that we have this, how could I say, markets that really depend on certain movements and and certain moments where they really want to take, how could I say, the opportunity. So essentially, what I mean to say is like there's the underbelly of the market economy that we've actually seen very clearly emerging. What I mean to say by that is like, if you are a trader, you don't care whether somebody dies by starvation. The ethics of global humanity is not tied into the global markets, and this is a real challenge. And this, when combined with this very, very bizarre characteristics of the global pharmaceutical sector, again, is a market-driven decision-making process. So, and let me give an example to just drive home what it really means. Imagine there's a vaccine. Imagine there's a vaccine that actually could save hundreds of thousands of millions of lives in Africa and in third world countries. And the cost of the vaccine, that's affordable cost of the vaccine, is like very low. And if you are a pharmaceutical firm, you would actually decide whether you want to release it or not. At the end of the day, what's actually being measured is like how the current economic system really values humanity. How do they value one human life in the developed world versus how they value a human life in some other parts of the world? And this is being driven really hard. And also the question of like COVID really has put the focus on people and the age distribution, the demographic of countries, right? The thing that people would have noticed already is like any country that actually has a population about 70, and the average population is like, so the life expectancy is in the 80s, you have a population that is in the 70s, and there's a good proportion of them at the 70s, and that is the population that has the largest amount of fatalities. And again, if you look at COVID is a supply chain phenomenon. So imagine you had a patient in ICU or intensive care, right? So literally, if you're thinking of 8-hour shifts, you have 3 people who's watching over this person 24 hours, right? And now you need to understand that in addition to those 3 people, you need to have at least 2 people outside to support those 3 people. And in addition to the people who are supporting them, you have doctors and other people who are distributed, at a low level. What I mean by that is, a doctor could probably say 10 or 20 patients, right? So if you look at all that, effectively what COVID has really shown us is how resource allocation happens. So generally speaking, humanity has had this strange urge to undervalue the risk of events that would happen with a low probability in distant future versus things that can happen with a higher certainty in near future. So, and this is also the problem that resource allocation when things happen. So if you have a variation in hospital admissions between summer and winter, and variation between years, we don't really take into consideration what might happen in 2 years or 3 years. And this is a real problem. And this again goes back to the challenge I was describing previously. This is a failure of democracy. Democracy really, really is a failed governance mechanism. Why is it so? It's just because I said, if your rule is for 4 years and you're not going to get any brownie points for the things you did, that will have a long-term implication. You can only do so if you really decide you and your party is going to lose, because the short-term trade-offs essentially is not going to be not very good. There are very, very few situations where both the long-term and short-term are really aligned. A lot of the hard choices, the choices is where you make a short-term loss for a long-term gain. And humans in general are very bad at delayed gratification. And this is a human decision bias. And we as humanity have been faced with this problem on a continuous basis. And if you were to look at Yuval Harari and other people, you could recognize that belief system was one of the things that humanity came up with that allowed us to actually align these incentives. So the fear of God, if you were to think of communists, says the fear of the central police, right? Whatever that is, that actually allowed you to actually shift from the short-term thinking to a long-term thinking. So unfortunately, given all those things have failed or are been failing, or we have this huge challenge which has been brought to a forefront by COVID. Literally, the failure of governance, failure of democracy, unequal distribution of resources, failure of actually good, robust, supply chains that allow a society to survive. These are the challenges that we have to, take the bull by the horn and kind of decide, and also the fact that our market's the right way to actually distribute some of the very finitely distributed resources in the society. This could be healthcare, this could be food, this could be water, this could be air. I don't know what it is, but we really need to rethink, because as I said, a trader, even though his action might result in hundreds of thousands of people dying, is not evaluated by his ethical decision-making process, is evaluated by the money he brings to the bank or the investment institution. And the investment institutions are always, always measured by the money they bring, not the ethics they have. We have a real misaligned incentive. we have no measures of ethics in the society. Given that we have no measures of ethics, and we actually have this real challenge of short-term versus long-term decision-making challenges, I think we have a very interesting open problem in front of us.
Well, I think you put it so fantastic, and I really I'm 200% with you, or 1,000, because I think it's a real big problem, and as well someone that has been studying finance and trading. You're right. I think the incentives are all wrong, but the problem as well that what you touch, and probably as the last question, but I think last interaction as well, is that the challenge is not just the financial and trading mechanisms that are not prepared to look at the profitable, the ethical, and the social impact, or the social investment as well, that you can look at it, but as well we have a completely failure of governance and failure of leadership, because our leadership systems which you touch are planned for 4 years. They're not planned based on meritocratic system. They plan based on people that are more related, and as well. But that is where I think, and coming up with a bit of hope to that, is that don't you think it's where I think people like us, and as well, we can actually build peer-to-peer decentralized platforms that actually can actually create a governance, because we have the tools. The irony is that we have more tools than ever. And I would like to provoke on that level, being positive, because we know the problems, and you touch it in a very powerful way. And I think it's very important what you touch about, that the trader is actually going to be rewarded for making money, even if he kills probably 1,000 or 1 million people. Because in the end of the day, it's true. If you're looking at someone in forex markets that suddenly will just take down an entire country, I'm sorry, that is probably taking down, when that happens, probably will kill at least 5,000 people, or even hundreds of
easily. Yeah.
So
I completely agree with you. We do have a lot of tools at our disposal. We do have a global coordination problem as well, and we can pretty much solve it. And in a way, you can actually see some of the real initiatives coming not from the governments. So I can give you examples of people who've actually done lots of things. So one of my friends who actually is from the machine learning space, he was one of the founders of Miri. He has an initiative to actually distribute masks in prisons in America. And I have other friends of mine who've actually, spending their own money. So I probably would quote another friend of mine, Daniel Fong, which is in public domain. She spent some of her own money to actually help, research and development against, viruses, right? So there are lots of people who are actually doing this, but effectively we don't have a coordination mechanism. So if we were actually being able to use coordination mechanisms, so we could look at Zoom, and right now we are using Zoom to actually do this interview, and Zoom actually is a very good coordination tool. You can actually get hundreds of people together from around the globe to think together, come to decisions. So we recognize, and we put in frameworks, and we started thinking about how to coordinate in a very, very, very interesting way. And this is one of the very interesting upsides of the whole thing happening. So previously, one of the things you might have noticed is we were all physically bound. All the conferences imply that you have to be physically there. What COVID allowed us to think differently is the fact that you no longer need to be there physically, but you could still have the impact even if you are not in the room. So this could be taken to the next level. We could actually have a democracy that represents people where, in a very decentralized peer-to-peer and location-independent manner, and we could actually bring forth, because a lot of us have access to resources, and given the way that there are no rules in the cyberspace about, the regions where we are located, and there's no differentiation between the first world or the third world, we might be able to, come up with solutions and implement them, and turn on its head what COVID has actually taught us. Like COVID actually, in a way, has been a good thing, waking us up to the challenges that humanity faces and the possible set of, answers that we might have, and that we can actually, look beyond the physical world, look beyond the, the boundaries of states and cities and countries, and think globally and work globally to actually looking for solutions and answers for the whole humanity.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to wrap up this. And I'm could not be more agreeing with you, and I think that's why we created as well citiesabc.com. That is precisely a bridge for cities to start collaborating with each other, and as well education and these initiatives and this kind of thought leadership that you're doing as well. It's critical. So Anish, just to finish, could you tell us where people can find you? You have your own podcast, different things. I think it's always good to shout and promote.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, I was, running a podcast, and what is it's called Pretopia. We actually interviewed a bunch of people. We have a bunch of podcasts that's been published. What literally had happened is, like, me and my partner in crime, other person called Nima. He had to take a full-time job. So overall the total time that's available for us has decreased significantly. But still, we tried to make a dent on the amount of bullshit that was there in the space. So we wanted to talk to people who we thought were thought leaders who could actually tell us the truth about the reality of the situation versus marketing. I still do that. I have a web page, it's anishmohammed.me. I mean, that doesn't have been updated for a very long time. Generally speaking, if there's a topic and you want to get hold of what I've done in this space, Google would be the easiest place to find my name and the topic, and you'll find it, because I have been very, very lazy. And I never thought of myself as a person who does the marketing for myself. I don't think there is much value in doing that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I've stuck to what I've been doing. It's just doing the things that need to be done rather than shouting out, what you have done. So that's how I think the value is created.
No, very good. Well, it's a fantastic, and of course, definitely we're going to be highlighting your profile, the links, and putting all of that both in all the multiple channels where you're going to be distributing, both on YouTube, but as well on citiesabc.com and Intelligent HQ and different platforms. So, Anish, I want to thank you so much. It's been a fantastic, almost 2 hours, but I think it's worth. And I want to appreciate this and wish you all the best and talk soon.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and thank you for interviewing me.